we had also, we're hoping that you could share with us some tips, I guess, on how to talk about the fair tax with, as you know, for candidates and for people who work with voters when we knock on doors. How do we explain this to people? How do we persuade them that they should vote for this? Because I believe it's going to take a 60%. There's a 60% threshold.
It's more complicated than that, actually.
Oh.
So let me start there,
Okay.
and then we'll do the choose your own adventure about how to do this. So the referendum is going to be on the ballot in November of 2020, right? So when we're voting for Elizabeth Warren over Mike Pence, we're also going to be voting yes on the fair tax. And the threshold to pass it is more complicated than a single number.
This is November? This isn't the primary?
No, November. Yeah.
We get a long time to think about this one.
Yeah.
I know. And that's really, look, one thing that I get when I do these presentations is a kind of a, dude, where are you guys? Where's the handouts and the flyers and the TV commercials? And I understand
13 months.
I have that anxiety too, but for the love of God, it's 13 months, and that addresses that question at least partially. But even the definition of passing it is complicated. The definition acknowledges that a lot of the time when we go and vote when we go and vote for president, we maybe aren't prepared to vote on referendum, we might leave some referendum blank. And so the way the threshold goes is it says, one way to pass is if a majority of the people who show up and vote yes. So let's say there's 2 million people show up. No matter how many leave this question blank, as long as 1,000,001 of them check yes, it passes. But you might say, what if 2 million people show up, but only 500,000 check yes or no? Is it sunk? Is it impossible to pass? No, it can still pass then. It can pass also if 60% of the people who check yes or no, in fact, check yes. So the practical meaning of that is that if most people leave it blank, it needs to pass 60-40. If very, very few people leave it blank, it can pass much closer to just 50 plus 1 to 50 minus 1.
So it's either 50 plus 1 or
yeah, it's 50 plus 1 of everybody who shows up,
or
60 who vote on the question. Would either one's good enough to get it done?
So in other words, vote.
Where did that come from?
In Illinois, there's 59 Senate districts, and every decade they get redrawn, and every decade each of the Senate districts is up for election 3 times, which means you get 2 4-year terms and a 2-year term, and the order that those come in is determined by a lottery that somebody has in a room with a locked door in Springfield every 10 years right after the census. It came from the same place that created that. So I've kind of got a spiel I do on this, but I think it's given the time of night, I don't want to launch into a 20-minute speech. Do you guys want to just start with questions for the two of us? Should we do a quick kind of level setting summary? What would be helpful?
Summary.
Okay.
Tell us what we need to deliver at the door.
Here's what I think is most fundamental here. Number one, we've got a budget problem. This people know. You do not need 2 people to come from a different county to tell you that Illinois has a budget problem. Number 2, we can fight all we want about the best way to solve it. And when you're running against Grant Worley, he's going to tell you that we can solve it with cuts alone. But the other thing he's going to do is not tell you how. Because nobody, not even the Republicans, has a plan to fix the budget with cuts alone. There's a lot of opinions to fight over, but the question of whether or not we need new revenue is a fact question, not an opinion question. It's an arithmetic question, not a values question. We cannot do it without some more money. Proof of that is that the Republicans won't say how they think it ought to be done. Proof of that is that we've cut higher education more than 50% in the last 20 years. There just isn't room. Lots of stuff we can fight over, but that is not one of them. So we gotta find new revenue, and the options are either bring in more revenue with the system we have now, or make this change. And the point that I think is most fundamental here is the system we have now is really weird. It's just different than almost every other state. There's only 4 states that have this thing in their constitution, only 4. We are the 8th most regressive tax state in the country. We are a state where the poor pay double the rich. If you're in the bottom, you pay like 14 or 15% of your income. And this is not cherry pick numbers, this is all state and local taxes all in. If you're in the bottom, you pay 14 or 15%. If you're in the top 1%, you pay 7 to 7.5. So the poorest people pay 14, 15, the richest people pay 7. Nobody, and again, we're very progressive people. I can advocate for really progressive policies that I personally believe in, but nobody would design that on purpose. No conservative, nobody would design that. It's just an artifact of this messed up system that we have in Illinois that most states don't have. If you're poor in Illinois, you would be better off crossing the border. Poor people do pay less in neighboring states. And so if you're poor in Illinois and you want to pay less in taxes, you have two strategies. You can cross a border to Wisconsin or Iowa, or you can get rich. Those are the two ways you can get a tax cut. In the meantime, if you're rich in Illinois, you should be happy. The wealthy do pay more in Wisconsin, significantly. They do pay more in Iowa, significantly. And so this plan to change our constitution to line us up with almost every other state's constitution, including our neighboring state, is a moderate, reasonable, common sense thing that says, listen, Illinois' budget is messed up enough for long enough that if there is a way that we do something fundamentally differently than all the other states around us, it's probably because we're doing it worse, and let's just be like them. That's the first thing. The next thing is the tax plan in question does such a crazy magic trick that I think that proves how messed up the status quo is. It brings in $3.5 billion a year that we need desperately. $3.5 billion. It does it while giving 97% of people a tax cut. So unless you make over $250,000 a year, you will be better off under this plan. So first of all, 97% of people are better off. Then it brings in the $3.5 billion we need to close our structural deficit. And so some people just say that's good enough. I'm happy, sign me up. But I'm a skeptic. So I would say, well, wait a second. If that many people get a break and it still brings in that much revenue, how high are you jacking up the top rate? Is it unreasonable? Is it radical? And the answer is the top rate in this plan is 7.95%, which is barely more than Wisconsin's top rate and way less than Iowa's top rate. So we bring in all this money while giving 97% of people a break and just matching our neighbors on everybody who's not getting a break. The fact that that's even mathematically possible is a sign of how bizarre and out of whack our system is right now. And so to me, that's the message. I've got all kinds of crazy progressive things I'm for that I'm happy to go knock on doors in Naperville and advocate, and I might have some trouble winning over friends on some of those issues in some doors in Naperville. But this is just saying, it's been good enough for Wisconsin since 1911. It's been good enough for Iowa since 1934. This is how almost every state does it. This is how Alabama and North Dakota do it. This is just normal. And if you think that Illinois' finances are screwed up, let's just try to be normal and go yes.
Yeah.
Do you,
that's
do you expect a slippery slope resistance? That if we give them this, they'll want more next year?
Yeah, so the argument against this, I'm sure you've all heard this, is basically, yeah, the thing Daniel says sounds great, but it's a trick. They're gonna pass the good tax bill now, and then they're gonna come back and get you next time. They're gonna get the middle class. And my answer to that is very simple. My answer is, by the way, not, hey, I trust Mike Madigan. That's not my personal answer, nor is it what I recommend you use at the door. My answer is that if this was about Mike Madigan's secret plan to raise taxes on the middle class, you know what he would do? He'd raise it today. He can do that now. He can do that now. The only reason to go through all of this hard work to put this referendum on the ballot and then try to pass it is to raise revenue a different way, which we can't do now. And as a matter of fact, since we need this revenue one way or the other, if this doesn't pass, they'll have to raise taxes on the middle class to make up the difference. That's what I'd say about that.
I think it's a
Oh,
good,
sorry.
it's a good line.
Just, if you think about, the piece we wrote, 66% of Americans don't have $1,000 in the bank. Only 54% of Americans have any money in the stock market. And last year was the first time that the super wealthy actually paid a lower tax rate than our neighbors who are more vulnerable. Well, it's been declining, but now, my point in saying all this is that you don't get to a system where 66% of Americans don't have $1,000. What I mean by that is you're going all the way up into the middle class there, right? People in the room. And so my point is, if people in the middle and even parts of the lower parts of the upper middle class are feeling the squeeze, that only happens when the system is set up for you never to get ahead. And it's designed for only a few people to aggregate all the wealth. So this is, I think, a truly monumental effort. If we move this in Illinois, could have major impacts on the national conversation about what, assuming we get a better president, right? And about what tax policy should look like. Because the system as it's currently set up, whether with an aggressive tax code here in Illinois and an ultra-regressive tax code at the national level, the system won't survive. It's just, this kind of inequality will not survive.
One thing that I thought was interesting when they were discussing the whole fair tax amendment was comparing the levels at which the higher rates kick in. And we have a very big, I mean, you can make a whole lot of money before those big rates kick in, or bigger rates kick in. Minnesota and Iowa, both those rates kick in higher and lower.
Yeah, no, I think the feeling here, which I have to tell you, I have a lot of sympathy for, is that our property taxes are really high, and so the middle class, and like as Ameya says, even the kind of lower end of the upper middle class are pretty squeezed on the property tax front in a way that they aren't in those other states. And so let's not use this as a tool to go after that same collection of middle class people who are already paying a lot over here yet further. Let's go after the one collection of people in Illinois who truly are undertaxed compared to other states. Genuinely, really, according to the numbers, you're just better off being a multimillionaire in Illinois than in Wisconsin or Iowa. Let's just make it fair for them. Use that money to start fixing a lot of what's wrong in our budget, including our school funding system, which could allow our property taxes over time to be quite different.
I like the idea of a fair tax or progressive tax for the state of Illinois. When I was analyzing the rates that were in the companion bill, I wasn't quite so enthusiastic, and that's because someone like me is likely to save $500 a year on my state income tax. I'll take the $500, thank you very much. But a wage earner that makes $10,000 or $12,000 a year is going to save $20. I think it's important that everyone pays something, but I think it's more important that the people at the very lowest income levels, let's say lower than $20,000 a year, pay 1% and be done with it. Why were the rates set, in my opinion, so high on the low income earners?
So I don't know, it's a great question. I'll just, this is not like Daniel Biss talking points machine speak, but just personally speaking, I agree with you. I think that we do overtax the poorest people in Illinois in a significant way. I think Ameya has a lot to say about the subject though, so if you want to say a word about EITC.
I mean, one of the things that I see in my day job with the Economic Security Project is the reason why so many people are struggling is because they don't have cash. People are poor because they don't have money. People can't pay their bills because they don't have money. And the best way to help people pay their bills or lift themselves out of poverty is literally to give them cash. And to me, the best way to reform, the most effective anti-poverty tool over the last 30 years has been the earned income tax credit. And if you have a progressive tax system that taxes appropriately at the top, there's a way to give cash back in a way that allows people to cover their most basic needs, put food on the table, buy diapers, pay for the everyday bills. And so this is I think going to be a major talking point of candidates on the Democratic side in 2020, the cost of living refund. There's various iterations of it, some more progressive than others, but I think there's a unique opportunity across states and at the federal level to really put cash back in people's pockets. But in order to do that, you need a progressive tax code. People who make a lot of money need to pay their fair share. Otherwise, again, you look at the stratification in this country. In San Francisco, you can make $165,000 a year and be considered low income because of housing costs. So I say all this is that the tax code is been designed in a way over the last 45 years, 50 years, to give money, to extract wealth from working people and give it to 26 families. So I'm just saying that needs to change. The only way to change that is you need to redistribute that money to work. It was extracted.
Are there other questions?
What about the people who worry about that their property taxes will not go down? Like the wealthy are gonna be paying more, but they're still gonna be paying their high property taxes. So that's what we hear out here in the collar counties a lot.
So again, I'm going to answer this as Daniel, not as like a wind-up talking point emitting doll. I see this as not a panacea, not a fix everything forever. I see it as an absolutely critical first step, not of a 47-step project, but of a 3, let's say, step project. To me, the property tax's most significant driver is the way we fund our schools, which is just totally out of whack, just totally unlike most states because of this tax problem. What fixing this tax problem allows us to do is to begin to drive money into the school funding formula that would be adequate, because a new school funding formula was written that actually is a pretty good formula, except it doesn't do any work until money is put in the formula to give school districts the adequate funds they really need. Once you have the tools to do that, then you really can, in a binding way, bring property taxes down. At that point, it becomes realistic to make that promise. If I were running for office, I would wish that I could say, this one referendum will do all those things at once. That is not true, but it is the most important step. It's the first step, and it's the directional step. Once we do this, then we're actually headed in the right direction to do the rest. Until we do this, we're pointed in the wrong direction and couldn't hope to do the rest. So I think it's essential. Yeah. Oh, sorry.
All right, so I think like we're all on the same page here that we're for, but how is it throughout the rest of the state? Like, how are we looking?
The polling data that I've seen is positive but soft, right? So like, if the vote were held today, we probably would pass. If the vote were held after 2 months of the other side running dishonest television commercials and us not fighting back, it wouldn't pass. One question people ask me a lot is, okay, if 97% of people would be better off, even if they wouldn't be as much better off as you might hope, if 97% of people would be better off, shouldn't this thing pass 97-3? Oh, plus JB would be worse off and he's voting yes, so like 97.001 to, right? And the answer, of course, is that the 3% have all the money and plan to fund an enormously dishonest advertising campaign.
Yeah.
And so, to me, where the rubber's going to meet the road is where these conversations turn into us talking to our friends and our neighbors, us knocking on doors as precinct committee people, us talking on the campaign trail and running for other offices, us talking to our family. I think it's going to be really close and hard fought. And I think it's going to be a little tricky to get people to really focus in on this, because again, we're going to be voting for a president, we're going to be voting for a DuPage County recorder, all these other things, and abstract tax policy doesn't get people's hearts beating faster a lot of the time. And so it's going to be a real project for us to do all the work we need to get the word out. But I think we'll be able to be successful if we can. Let me say one other thing, really just like raw political analysis here. This thing passed the legislature to get on the ballot with all the Democrats voting yes and all the Republicans voting no. And that's kind of how it's gonna look. You're gonna have every Democratic elected official and candidate for office out there beating the drum say vote yes, and every Republican elected official and candidate for office out there beating the drum saying vote no. The Sun-Times editorial page is gonna say vote yes, and the Tribune and the Daily Herald are gonna say vote no. It's gonna feel kind of partisan. And the Democrats gonna win Illinois with a big margin, though not 60%, so that sort of sets things up well. But, and I say this as a proud Evanstonian, government building in Naperville, the opponents who are gonna be trying to figure out who they can pick off, who's gonna vote for Elizabeth Warren over Mike Pence, but who they can persuade to vote no on this anyway, is gonna be looking in Democratic-leaning affluent suburbs. They're gonna be looking for our neighbors who loathe Donald Trump with the fire of 1,000 suns, but who aren't so sure about Democrats and tax policy. And we're gonna have to tell those folks the truth. Because actually those folks, when they hear the facts about this, they wind up on our side, because the facts are with us. We're gonna have to do that work to get that word out, especially in places like Naperville and Evanston and Wilmette and Downers Grove and Hinsdale.
We're gonna do our best.
Thank you.
Not only do we have Grant Worley for the bulk of Naperville, we also have Amy Grant, who has part of Naperville. So they both.
But then
just-
Stella Murray too, and she's
True.
good.
True, but they both beat the drum constantly.
Yeah.
That's all Grant Worley, everything we ever get from Grant Worley is always, it's for years, it's just been no, no, no to the progressive tax.
Yep. Well, if you look at who signs his campaign contribution checks, you'll know why.
Exactly. Do we have other questions? We have Denny.
Yeah, I just have one question. You talked about you said 66% of the nation only has 1,000,
Doesn't have $1,000 in the bank.
does not.
For an
66, so only 34% has
Yeah.
$1,000 in the bank.
That's quite a number.
Yeah, 2/3 of the country, with a relatively severe car problem, is put in a state of financial instability.
Well, since we began the discussion, we're gonna let's thank our presenters right now.
Yeah.